In the year 2000, long before the youth group, does anybody remember everyone being obsessed and panicked about Y2K? It was insane. And then in 2012, there was the Mayan apocalypse, that the world was supposed to end on December 21st, 2012. A new book has just come out claiming, by the way, that in fact, that was just the beginning, and the new end of the world is this December 21st, 2019. So that gives you something to look forward to. You don't have to worry about Christmas shopping this year. And who could forget Howard Camping? I have no idea how this strange man managed to get such a following, but he came up with 12 different times that the world was going to end, and God finally took him home before he could come up with a 13th. People sold everything they had in order to give him money to put up billboards and big advertisements on buses. On a different note, I grew up during the Cold War, when fear of nuclear apocalypse stalked daily life. There were no religious overtones, just sheer terror of the Russians. I am sure that I am not the only one who imagined what being disintegrated in a nuclear holocaust would feel like as a child. Many of us lived in that fear. We had fallout shelter drills at school, which made absolutely no sense to me. At Kinwood Elementary School, we had to go into the hallway and crouch down. Like that was going to help. In other places, they got to hide under their desks. Like that was going to help. It was, let's get them to do something. I am told that the children in Alabama every year were given fresh dog tags. They thought that this was a great thing, but in fact the dog tags were to identify their bodies in case the worst happened. Miraculously, we're all still here. It's not that we're not capable of destroying the planet, it's just that we seem to have opted to do it slower through climate change and global warming. Do we live in fear? Do we not live in fear? How exactly are we supposed to live? Luke wrote his gospel right in the midst of the fulfillment of Jesus' prophetic words, about 10 years after the fall of the temple. The nation of Israel was in a tumult. It was chaos. There was all kinds of things going on. Jerusalem, the temple, horrible things had happened. And so Jesus' words that might not have made a lot of sense when he spoke them suddenly came into sharp relief. The temple was an incredible structure. And when Jesus and his disciples were there, it had been under construction for 46 years. It wasn't even complete. It was not actually finished until the year 63, and it was destroyed in the year 70. But it looked indestructible. It was 15 stories high and constructed of huge white stones. Parts of it were covered with plates of gold, and it shone brightly, blindingly in the sun. The furnishings were lavish, and many devout Jews contributed to the decoration. The temple looked like it would stand for 1,000 years. But the Romans had techniques using fire that could in fact bring down massive buildings. And by the time it got to the point where they actually brought the temple down, the people had been starved for about a year and were being slaughtered. It was a dreadful, dreadful time. Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity only survived because they both had strong communities outside of Jerusalem. Jesus' followers wanted to know when this would happen. When is the temple going to fall? He answered them, "Watch out that you are not deceived. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, that the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Before all these things means in context before the destruction of the temple, not before the second coming. But we have been so keyed up with imagery of the end of the world that we overlook the fact that here Jesus is actually referring to a historic, concrete event, an event that did take place. And the things he warned about did happen. The book of Acts tells us of 3 false prophets: Theudas, Judas the Galilean, and an unnamed Egyptian, who all claimed to be the Messiah. In the year 66, anti-Roman sentiment had grown so hot that a rebellion against Rome and Nero erupted. Nero sent Vespasian, and Vespasian recruited his son Titus, and it was Titus who ultimately destroyed and brought down the temple. But the disaster did not end there. The second cataclysmic destruction came about when Simon Bar Kokhba in 132 decided it was time to rebuild the temple and rebel against Rome. And by 135, the Jewish nation had suffered another catastrophic defeat. The rebellion was crushed, and no Jews were allowed back in Jerusalem at all. In addition to destruction and chaos, Jesus spoke about persecution. And persecution came. Until the year 313, when Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, Christianity was illegal. Now, the persecution wasn't constant, it came in waves. It depended upon which emperor was looking for a scapegoat when. Many Christians were betrayed by their family members and their friends. They were put in prison. They were brought before leaders to give an account of their actions and their beliefs, and they gave testimony. Some survived, but many were put to death. Jesus said, "Everyone will hate you because of me." But he also said, "Stand firm and you will win life." This is where the prophetic words of Jesus do begin to merge into longer time. Because while these things did happen, and there are 2 concrete fixed points in time when we can see fulfillment, the year 70 and the year 313, we know that persecution continues because there is a spiritual battle that continues to go on till this present day. The most dangerous and life-threatening nations in the world in which to be a Christian today include North Korea, which used to be top of the list, Afghanistan, which now is a very close second, in fact, they're about tie, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Iran, Pakistan, Eritrea, Nigeria, Libya, Saudi Arabia, the Maldives, Yemen, Uzbekistan, Qatar, Vietnam, and China. And this list is not exhaustive. There are still more. It's just exhausting to name them all. We have no idea how blessed we are that we live in a place where Christianity is not against the law. It is viewed as a threat by two different ideological opponents. The first are atheistic regimes that call themselves communist, but in fact are really dictatorships. True communism means everybody gets a say, but in North Korea, one man gets a say. In China, one man gets a say. So they call themselves communist, but they are threatened by anything that would undermine the state. And the other we know is nations that are run by a fundamentalist Islamic form of faith that views any other religion as something to be exterminated. The world is not a safe place. It has never been a safe place. But we don't really believe that because we live in America and most of the time we feel safe. Most of the time, if we're the right color or the right sexual orientation or have the right legal status or live in the right neighborhood. So what is Jesus saying to us? Many of the warnings Jesus gives are standard boilerplate apocalyptic. It was a formula. Apocalyptic imagery is basically all the worst and most horrible things that could possibly happen wrapped into one. Throw them all together. The kitchen sink, famine, war, flood, disease. It's a who's who of everything that can possibly go wrong. But when you hear about catastrophes like this, Jesus says, don't panic. These things will happen. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and famines and pestilences in various places. There will be fearful events and great signs from heaven. And add to that, there'll be waves of persecution. But, says Jesus, make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. And then comes the very contradictory promise, some will be put to death and not a hair of your head will perish. How do we put that together? How do we make sense of this? On the one hand, we're given a whole list of things that would make anyone panic and head for the hills. And then we're told not to be terrified and don't even plan about what we're going to say if worse comes to worse. Just leave it to God. If fear isn't warranted in these circumstances, when is it? Fear is a survival mechanism. When running from a tiger, it is excellent. If a tiger walks in here today, I encourage you all to run. But since God designed the system, God knows how fear works and knows that fear can be crippling, especially when we need to be proactive and make decisions. This is why Jesus tells us not to be overcome by fear, to make it